I'm so privileged and honored and feeling so excited to be here with Tova today and to dive into what I think is going to be quite a powerful conversation around subjects that have been very much on my mind this year in particular. Thank you so much for joining us for the summit, Tova.
Thank you for having me.
We were just talking about our mutual locations. So Tova is in Sweden and I'm in Australia. It's amazing how we get to just connect across the globe and across these time zones and yeah, be here to share this conversation. I wanted to start, Tova, by asking you a little bit about your background, particularly for women in the summit who don't know you. You're a person who, from what I can see, has taken an extraordinarily deep dive into the world of tantra, yogic philosophy, Hinduism, mystical spirituality. I mean, it looks like it really is your dharma and it's your life's work. And I'm interested to ask you, where has that come from? How did that arise? I mean, when people ask me this question, I often just default to what I really believe is true, that it has to be a past life thing, because
Mm.
there's no other explanation really for why my interest in yoga has been so long and so deep, other than many lifetimes. And perhaps you feel the same.
Yes, yeah, I would have to second that. I mean, I am a scholar of religion, so I'm careful with sounding, too hippie-ish. But at the same time, as with you, when I get this question and I start thinking like when was I introduced to yoga? I feel like I was always practicing yoga, but in different ways. Like what you talk about, the studies, I was always a reader. I was a writer. I was interested in philosophy, in religion. I was always a mover. When I was a child, I did gymnastics, I did dance. I always felt like it was natural to move my mind and my body in these ways. And so I started practicing yoga through books, I believe. I have asked friends, like, when did I start practicing yoga? Do you remember? But I think, I was always going to the library as a child. And when I was traveling also as a young person, I moved away from home when I was 17. I moved to Paris when I was 17 because I wanted to write, I wanted to dance, I wanted to do things that I couldn't do in school, even though I was a really good student. I had really high grades, but I was restless. I was searching. I wanted to get out there and see what the world had to offer. And so I think that I was already practicing yoga at that time, probably through books. And later on, I also lived in the Caribbean and I was practicing yoga there. I was also teaching yoga way before I had a yoga teacher training. And also was teaching yoga in Sweden, it was in more than 20 years back. And after that, of course, I searched out teachers and I did yoga teacher trainings and all of these things. But that was really not the first thing that happened to me on that journey of yoga. So I would say that studies of philosophy and religion was something that came in very, very early for me, since I was, basically going through all the books in the library in the small town that I was from. And so eventually I bumped into those sections that really, fascinated me. And that's pretty much the journey I've been on ever since.
I'm smiling because it so resonates for me, because it's very similar to my journey actually. I was a pretty academic student and I left school very young to pursue the path of yoga. So I really relate to that. And it's like I feel in your answer and I feel it in myself as well. It's a very difficult question to answer because it's not actually of the mind. It's like literally you're just compelled, like it's just who you are. You're following the path of what you've been called to in this lifetime. It's not really like a sort of a consciously planned out journey. I mean, it certainly wasn't in my case, and it sounds like very similar for you.
It was not a business plan.
Yeah.
Not at all.
Yeah, and yet here we are. Decades later, the path has really cared for us and has shown us the way. And there is this perfect, this kind of divine grace that when we follow what we're here to do, everything works out as it should. The path is revealed to us step by step. There's so many different things I would love to talk to you about, but I'm going to try and stick with our focus today, which is spiritual activism, because that's really the focus of our summit. And there's something in particular that has really piqued my interest that you've been talking about recently, which is this idea of what you call narcissistic spirituality. And when I read about this and heard you speaking about it, through your social media, and for people who are interested in listening, I really encourage you to go and look through the archives of Tova's social media, because it's very educational. Her content is really robust. Like, it will give you a lot of food for thought. But with those words, narcissistic spirituality, it's like something in me just clicked, a sort of question I'd had around, I'm sure that we are not here as yogis to spend quite so much time navel gazing without also thinking about what's going on in the world. And I think particularly, for example, with what's happening right now in Palestine, and that's just taking one example of something horrific that's happening on the planet at this moment. Personally, I feel a great sense of obligation to be a voice, to be engaged, to be an activist in whatever way that means, as well as the self-care element, as well as the personal growth journey. So I'd love if you could just speak to that a little bit, and also perhaps where you think we go wrong, particularly as Westerners, when we do get too caught up in the journey of the self without the focus on what's happening externally.
Well, there's a lot to unpack here, right? It's a very, very complicated subject, so we'll have to speak about it in a nuanced way, which is what I try to do on my online platform as well. First, I want to say that, part of what we could call spiritual narcissism is, of course, when we have, the schools where we have abusive teachers that have, platformed themselves through, a sense of, strong charisma and strong sense of authority. And so this is something quite different, right? Sometimes these things go together, but this is one aspect of it that I think we're going to get into today as well, where we have, spiritual abuse or that kind of spiritual narcissism, where a teacher or an organization will use their authority and use their charisma to trap people into cycles of abuse, which is a little bit different from what you were talking about as that intense navel gazing, or being really, really obsessed with our own healing in a way that makes us unable to look at what is going on around us, right? This, I think, is just part of the fact that we have a deeply narcissistic society. Of course, we're all basically selling ourselves in this great marketplace of contemporary spirituality, whether we like it or not, right? And so it's very, very easy when people are constantly trying to sell new healing modalities onto you, whether it's like finding the tiniest little difficulty you had in your life and calling it trauma, right? And then being endlessly obsessive about trying to get to the root of that and trying to heal that. I mean, I think it is beautiful that we have all of the discussions that we have within contemporary spirituality about trauma, about the regulation of the nervous system, about all of these things that have really blown up over the last few years. But at the same time, they also risk trapping us in this self-obsession where we are, always thinking that we have to control our minds, that we are responsible for our life situations, that we chose every single event that ever happened to us in our lives. And I mean, the gnarly, the difficult things about this conversation is that there are nuggets of truth in there, right? We know that, of course, our state of mind, will affect our lives. Of course, that we might have chosen some particular aspects of our lives in order to grow or learn in certain ways. So there is what we could call perhaps an absolute truth. And then there is also the relative truth. And I think as a teacher of Tantra, especially, this is something that is very, very important to um, be able to grasp and to also to work with these two levels of reality, that um, some beliefs, some statements can be true in an absolute sense, but we are still embodied and we're still here in all of our relationship. And so we also have to face everything that is going on a relative level. And so for an absolutely true statement, speaking from a non-dual tantric perspective, might be that there is just one thing in this world. There is just consciousness and energy. Fine, but even though we might know this, we might even have had the embodied experience that we are consciousness and energy, we are still here in this particular life situation, in this particular body. And so it's really helpful when we meet our family or our friends or our students from the absolute perspective. That can be appropriate in certain learning spaces, right? But the rest of the time, in the rest of our lives, we have to deal with what is here on the relative level, right? And so that would be my first
Mm.
answer to the
Yeah.
question.
And the way that you just articulated that it's so refreshing to hear someone speak about it so directly, because I think often we get very nervous about, for example, the conversation about trauma. It's like not honoring someone's trauma by calling out this kind of attitude of nitpicking on, like you said, every difficult thing that's ever happened to you. And to really name that, and to be willing to say, of course, there are struggles in everyone's lives. Of course, we all have difficulties, but we also need to look at our privilege. And, when you were just talking about how it's on the absolute level, we're all energy, we're all consciousness, we're all one. What that does is it bypasses the idea, or the very real reality, that some of us are enjoying enormous privilege. I mean, if we are educated and we are financially stable and we are white skinned, etc., etc., etc. We're already in such a tiny minority of the world's population in terms of privilege, that for us to say we're all one, it's all the same, feels to me extremely arrogant. It's
Mm.
like that. What type of sameness is there in my life compared to a woman of the same age as me with the same number of children living in Palestine right now, a Palestinian woman? It's very unreasonable to come at it
Mm.
from that perspective. So, and I think that, the true definition of the narcissist is that they don't see their own self-centeredness. And that's you've absolutely nailed it by saying that it's collective. It's like a collective hypnosis that we're all engaged in. And I'm
Mm.
interested to know where you think this is coming from. Is it a self-perpetuating situation? Is it just this moment in history? Is it going to, like, how have we gotten here? How did we get to this point?
I am an historian of religion, but I'm not an historian of ideas, and I can't really say. I don't think I'm the right person to answer that question. But I do think that social media, for example, is a huge part of it. And I also think that, maturity comes with time. And a lot of people that are within the spiritual communities, they're still in that, the fresh new love of just having encountered yoga or tantra or things like this. And so it becomes all about my experience, this lovely experience that I'm having that you want to share with everybody around you, but it's still all about you, your experience, right? And so I think it takes a lot of maturity with these practices. And I also think, it takes a level of discernment that might be something that you develop in time, of course, because this is part of yoga practice. It's something that we speak about a lot in contemporary spirituality, is like not having judgment, not judging people, basically not saying anything about anything, right? But developing tarka and developing viveka levels of discernment is very much part of yogic and tantric tradition. uh, Knowing to separate, what is true from what is untrue, and what is helpful from what is not helpful, and what is appropriate from what is not appropriate, and so on. So I think that there is that, being scared of being negative or being scared of being judgmental, and so that's part of it. I have so many different trains of thought going on at the same time now, but I think this has been going on for quite some time, and there's also, of course, some of us that are more that have more of a critical personality. I mean, that's why I'm within academia. And I was always like that, even from the beginning when I started teaching yoga, I was very concerned about the fact that we had this, then, the notion of the laws of attraction or positive thinking. This was all just coming up around that time, and people were hypnotized by this basically, and policing themselves and policing others with not being negative. And this is something that I really brought to the yoga studios where I was working and the communities that I was in, that, I don't think this is the way to go. I think that we will lose solidarity with people that are in very difficult situations in their life if we keep saying to ourselves that we create our own reality. Again, this is an absolute perspective, but not very helpful when we look around in the world and then basically say that we don't have to take responsibility for anybody else because they chose that particular life situation. And I think this is just a horrible way to approach humanity, right?
Mm.
Or other living beings as well. But I also think that about these levels of maturity, that there are also people within the spiritual communities that have just started to realize, social activism or these levels of, consciousness, and they're going over the top in another direction, very aggressive with it, because maybe feminism or social activism, a sense of justice, all of these things were not really things that they had been working with for a long time. And that's why I really try to nuance this, because I feel like what we have now are either people that are shouting at other people that they should be more concerned. Or we have people that are basically putting their hands in the sand, their heads in the sand, and not doing anything. And we need a middle path. We need something in between where we can say, well, we all have, different duties and different capacities, and we work with what we have for the betterment of this world, right? So that it's not about um, being too afraid of judging others, but it's not either about being too eager to judge other, which is also what we see on social media, of course, which is quite exhausting, this polarity
Yeah.
thinking is going on there. A lot of thoughts here. You'll have
No,
to.
no, I'm vigorously nodding my head because I'm agreeing with everything you're saying. And one of the threads that I'd love to pull from what you just said is this idea that, because you spoke about maturity and how we evolve over time, and this idea that it's okay for us to be in that evolution and to change our minds. There may be women listening to this conversation who are feeling like, I haven't done enough. I haven't looked outside of myself enough. I haven't been engaged enough with the world. And there may be other women who are listening who are thinking, I've been that overzealous person. I've been the person with the placard and the agenda and the shouty vibes. And one of my heartfelt intentions in creating this summit is to create a safe space where we can come together and be curious enough and open-minded enough that we would be able to change our minds, maybe not in a radical way, but to have shifts, to be available to be to see something differently, to be available for a change of perspective. And I think that's really the essence of what yoga is all about, that we're living, evolving, growing, expanding beings. And it's also very counterculture because we're generally not encouraged, you know, like to go back to the social media example, it's very much like black and white. What's your opinion? Where do you stand? Represent yourself. And I love that you use the word nuance, this idea that, well, we're multifaceted and some of these things are really complicated. And it's okay for us to sit in not knowing and not having complete clarity and still being curious. Um,
Mm.
I'm going to change tack slightly. You spoke at the beginning of our conversation about this idea of what we might call the fallen gurus, or, you know, many of the teachers in the yoga tradition over the last few decades have been shown to be less than ideal, right through to, you know, outrageous perpetration. Um, and I think a question that a lot of people have on the path now is, how do I know who is a true teacher? How do I choose a teacher? What is the um, how do we trust in our teachers? Do you have any thoughts or guidance around that?
Mm. Well, when you said, how do we trust? I just think about, how do we trust a partner or a dear friend, or, all of these things come with time. People earn our trust, and we learn to relax into the relationship with time, right? And so I don't think there is any waterproof way where we can approach a teacher and immediately know, but we see in time, right? There are some things that we can immediately see if they are, maybe a teacher will not allow us to have other teachers. They don't want students that talk back to them. They are extremely defensive. All of these things are, of course, red flags, as we would say in this time and age. Um, but other things I think that we see over time, that a teacher, for example, can say when they don't know, that they have a transparency about what has been going on in their lineage, perhaps, that they are willing to, sit with the more difficult questions and perhaps say, well, I don't have the answer to that, but I know a person that might have the answer to that, and you can go ask them instead. Instead of sitting and acting like, well, I have all of the answers, and when you are deserving enough, you will get them, not keeping secrets in that way. So I would say transparency, also maybe a sense of vulnerability, and being able to allow you to go and seek the information with other teachers as well, right? So no sense of possessiveness. Um, but other than that, I think it's basically just time, and not letting go of your intuition. We're often told that the teacher can see things in us that we don't see in ourselves, and that might be the case, just like we are constantly mirrored by our partners, our children, everything around us that make us see things that were not as clear to ourselves, of course. But I think that um, it's so easy to give up your power, especially as female practitioners. And I think that many of us have learned the hard way that our intuition was really right all along, and that we can actually trust it. So this again, it's that fine balance between constantly, completely throwing out the baby with the bathwater and saying, well, all of the wisdom that I need is already here, and, it's the inner guru and all of this, or being completely depending upon outer teachers. I think we need both, and I have brilliant, brilliant, brilliant teachers that I, feel so grateful for. And without, I don't know how I would have reached, um, the knowledge that I was so deeply longing for. But I also knew when to move on. I also moved on from many different teachers because I felt like, there is brilliance here and there is deep knowledge here, but there is also perhaps a stinky personality. And if I stay with this person, I will become like this person because that is what happens with us. We become like the company we keep. And especially the teachers that are very close to us, we start to resemble them. And so if there are, qualities in them that we really don't want to pick up on, I would suggest that we move on.
A question I've asked myself often in my life is this point, and actually this comes up not just in relationship with teacher, but also in relationship with partner or friendships or all relationships, around knowing when it's time to move on because that's the right thing and the relationship is no longer serving, versus the desire to move on because it's hard and the teacher
Mm,
may be asking of us something, for example, a sadhana practice that is challenging or confronting, and we don't want to do it anymore. And so,
mm,
then it's easy to kind of say, and I noticed that, we could do this in relationships too. We reach a difficult point, or there's an argument or some kind of distance, and it's easy to just kind of throw that person away, right? Throw that teacher away, throw that school away, which kind of brings us full circle back to the narcissism piece. And
mm.
I'm wondering, maybe you have an example in your own life, or you have some thoughts around where do we find that discernment of, should I be working through this because the challenge is important to my spiritual growth and actually I need to stay in it and work
Mm.
through it, versus this is a toxic environment and my best option, the most appropriate thing to do is to leave?
All the difficult questions today,
Yeah.
right?
Well, I'm asking
But,
you the difficult questions because you have so much deep thinking and I'm squeezing the juice out of this conversation, but I don't expect you to know all the answers to everything.
mm, but these are the conversations, right? And I think that you mentioned the key word there again, discernment, right? And self-knowledge in some ways, because as you said, this takes us full circle back to narcissism. We see that in contemporary society so much that is all about basically, everything that doesn't make you feel good, you get rid of. Like you stop seeing your own parents, you stop seeing your siblings, you stop seeing even your own children or their friends or whatever it might be because they don't have that right energy. And so these are really difficult questions because, of course, sometimes we have to let go of relationship. For me, I know myself as, a former partner of me called me kamikaze. Like, I really have that, like, I go all the way. I will go all the way through until I give up. Like, I have an extremely disciplined personality,
You're
right?
not a quitter.
No, so I know that for me, if I decide to leave or if I decide to give up, it's because there is nothing left. It's basically a pile of ashes that I leave behind. But if you know that you are the kind of person that give up more easily, then I would consider then I would consider, of course, that that is the case, that while seeing the patterns in many different parts of your life, like, okay, is this my tendency when things get a little bit tough? Then I back out. Well, then maybe, but the wrong partner or the wrong teacher will not only ask you to do something that is difficult, they will ask you to do something that is, against your nature or against you know, the deep sense of what is your limits. And I think this is also, of course, something that is so, so difficult to know, depending on how our upbringing has been and what kind of teachers that we had. I'm not talking about yoga teachers, but all types of life teachers, right? Have we been able to feel where our natural boundaries are, how we develop a sense of integrity. So this is so difficult to know, like, is this just my pride? Is this my integrity? What is going on here? So having, trustworthy friends, having other people in your spiritual community that you can speak with, and then not second guessing your intuition over and over and over again, right? If you have been in a pattern when you know that you have stayed too long and then you find yourself in a similar situation, maybe this time give yourself a break and say, okay, well, I recognize myself in this pattern and I have stayed way too long before. Now I don't have to think that this is all me, this is my ego, whatever it might be, but that is just time for me to move on. And I speak with students about this all the time, that they feel like maybe there is a particular lineage or a particular technique that they are interested in, and they know that there are shady things going on within that organization or within that lineage or with that particular teacher, but they're still willing to go there for that particular technique. And I will usually say that the technique is never worth it, because personally, I have great trust in the Divine Mother. And as you said, leading you all the way through on that path of Dharma, that if there is something that is really for you, if there is a technique that you need to learn or a lineage that you need to belong to, that will happen for you in a way that is not damaging for you. And I think a lot of the times we are interested in particular techniques or lineages because there is authority or power connected to that we think would be beneficial for our career or our spiritual development, even though we might, camouflage this for ourselves in different ways and say that that is not the case. I think that a lot of us are still kind of ruled by the fact that we think that something is the right thing to do because that will give us a sense of credibility or authority or power. So I think that we have to be really careful with that aspect of ourselves too. Wanting to be close to certain teachers or wanting to be close to certain organizations because it looks good, right? Or if we have been part of an organization and that is part of we're heavily invested in that lineage and we know that things are going on, then we tend to not be transparent about it because we want to keep that sense of superiority or authority, right? So there are many, many different things going on here. But knowing when to leave, knowing when to stay, it's the most difficult question, right? It's something in between, right? Knowing ourselves, not quitting too easily, of course, but also knowing our patterns and staying with intuition, staying with integrity, which is of course, the hardest thing, and which is something that nobody else can teach us, just life, right?
Yeah.
Sorry for giving you such crap.
No, it's such powerful food for thought. It really is. And I feel like we could talk all evening. I would be happy to sit here for many more hours and be in conversation with you, but we are running close to time. So I'm just going to ask you one final question, if I may, which is, I'm curious about what is lighting you up at the moment. What are you reading? What are you listening to? What are you studying? Maybe it's in the area of what we've been talking about today. Maybe it's something completely different. I'd love for you to share.
Well, I'm always studying religion, right? Because I'm working on my PhD, and so I'm reading a lot of literature that has to do with contemporary spirituality and the sociology of religion, basically, but also the history of religion. So that is one part of my life, right? And then I tend to also read something that is more, spiritual literature at the same time. And of course, books that I always return to are the books by my teacher, Sally Kempton. And I tend to also listen to her. I find that very, very both stimulating and nurturing. She passed away 1.5 years ago, but I still listen to her teaching online or just podcast or so with her, because it's so reassuring just to hear her voice and to hear her, there's always something. When I have a question around something, I find that there's always something that she addresses about her own life, or um, just teaching about something that I feel like, okay, that's what I needed to hear to kind of help me to move on with what I'm doing. So I'm always usually teaching, and then at the same time studying some sacred texts like the Vijnana Bhairava Tantra or the Ramayana or the Devi Mahatmya. Like I'm always reading something that will also give nurturance to my soul. Today, I just started listening to a podcast too called The Bad Guru, about yoga organization that I've actually been doing research on for many, many years, where there has been a lot of abuse going on. And so those are the different, kind of aspects of my life that I'm studying religion, I'm studying what is going on in contemporary spirituality, and I'm also trying to, feed my heart and feed my soul, because it's so easy when you really go into the history of religion and you really go into all of the cases of abuse that we see within contemporary yoga and tantra, that you, as I said, you throw the baby out with the bathwater and become a complete cynic and say, well, I'm done with it. But at the same time, for me, when I had all through these years of practice, I had many, many periods of deep doubt. And during those periods of deep doubt, my sadhana always got even more intense, even more fierce. So I feel like there's always something that is drawing me back. Um, and what that is, that is the mystery. I would say that it's the Divine Mother from, where I am in my practice right now. But those are, the different um, areas of study that I always engage with. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for your time today, and for your curiosity and your open heart, and for the beautiful and very generous sharing that you do. As I mentioned before, for people who want to learn more from you, there's many opportunities to do so online, and we'll of course link to website and all of the different offerings. But I think a really great place to start is your social media. I see so many people on social media just sharing very light and quite empty content, and yours is really the opposite of that. It's actually a whole library, really, of education.
Thank
So
you.
thank you for the
I
work.
have put a lot of work into that.
I feel it.
Those
I feel
posts,
it,
yeah.
and I think your followers feel it too. And it's a great service, actually. It really is. It's a beautiful savor. Thank you so much for your time today, Tova. We really appreciate you.
Much for allowing me this space. And I know it's been a little bit unclear, but these are also questions that it's very difficult to be clear about, right? And sometimes more easy to be clear in writing, right? So I really recommend both going to the social media, but also looking at my academic work. And so if you're really interested in getting into this in a more academic way. So
Mm.
what I try to do is always balance discernment with devotion, so that people feel that there is both nurturance for that critical mind and nurturance for the heart at the same time. So really grateful to be here today and to get to speak with you finally.
Yeah. Thank you so much. You just brought to mind something my father said to me when I was very young, and I hadn't thought of this for a very long time. It just came into my head just then. And my father is not a yogi, he's a mechanic. He's a working class man from London. And he said to me, one of the most intelligent things that you can ever say or think is that you're not sure, or that you don't know. And as a child, it really stuck with me, because we adults tend to speak to children in these very definite, like a lot of certainty. And I really remember him saying that, and it's something that has stayed with me throughout my life, that to sit in a place of curiosity, a place of not knowing, a place of nuance, a place of it's this and it's also that, is so powerful. And I think that our whole conversation today has really illustrated that. So thank you for sparking that memory. And and bringing
Beautiful.
that quality to the table, which I think is so desperately needed.
Hmm. Thank you so much. And take care.